The ocean remembers everything. Every drop of blood spilled on deck planks. Every scream that died in salt spray. Every soul claimed by the endless blue. For over 4,000 years, humans have turned the world's waters into hunting grounds, slave markets, and graveyards. This isn't the story you've seen in movies. No swashbuckling adventures or noble rogues. This is the true history of maritime terror, from ancient sea peoples to modern pirates with AK-47s, told in the voices of those who lived it, died from it, and profited by it. If you enjoy these dark dives into history's brutal truths, like this video and subscribe to Bedtime History for more stories that reveal what really happened. Close your eyes and listen. The tide is calling. Chapter 1. Hell on Water, Destroying the Romantic Myths. The rope creaks above your head. Salt spray burns your eyes as the crowd below jeers and throws rotten fruit at your feet. This is Execution Dock, Wapping, London, where the Thames meets the gallows, and where the golden age of piracy comes to die. One by one they swing. Blackbeard's crew, Robert's men, nameless killers who thought the sea would keep them free forever. The tide will wash over their corpses 3 times before they're cut down. Maritime law, they call it. Justice, others whisper. But you know the truth. This is simply how every pirate story ends. The morning fog lifts from the harbor, revealing a sight that would make Hollywood producers weep. No majestic ships with billowing sails catching golden sunlight. Instead, rotting hulks listing in filthy water, their decks crawling with rats the size of cats. The air reeks of human waste, spoiled meat, and the sickly sweet stench of gangrene. Men stumble across tilting planks, their faces gaunt from scurvy, teeth loose in bleeding gums, eyes hollow with the kind of madness that comes from too many months staring at empty horizon. This is the reality behind every romanticized tale of maritime adventure. Pirates weren't noble rebels fighting tyrannical kings. They were desperate criminals who chose violence over starvation, murder over honest work. They lived like animals because civilization had no place for them, and they died like animals because the sea demanded payment for every crime committed on her surface. The ship's hold tells the real story of pirate life. Forget treasure chests overflowing with gold doubloons. What you find instead are the tools of maritime terrorism. Rusted cutlasses sticky with dried blood, like irons that once held screaming captives, and human bones picked clean by the rats that shared every meal. The wooden planks beneath your feet are stained black with substances you pray are tar, but your nose knows better. Disease ruled these floating hells more absolutely than any captain. Scurvy rotted gums and loosened teeth until men spat blood with every word. Dysentery turned the lower decks into sewers where grown men soiled themselves while begging for death. Tropical fevers burned through crews like wildfire, leaving survivors to heave corpses overboard while wondering if they would be next. But death by disease was merciful compared to death by violence. Pirates settled disputes with blade and pistol because there were no courts to hear grievances, no laws to protect the weak. Men were keel-hauled for minor infractions, dragged under the ship's hull until barnacles flayed the flesh from their bones. Others were marooned on barren islands with a pistol containing one shot, left to choose between slow starvation and quick suicide. The famous pirate code that fiction celebrates was actually a survival manual written in blood. Share the plunder equally or face mutiny. Keep your weapons clean or die in the next boarding action. Obey the captain's orders or be thrown overboard. These weren't noble principles. They were the minimum requirements for keeping murderous psychopaths focused on external targets rather than killing each other. Women in the pirate world faced horrors that no adventure story dares mention. Female captives were routinely raped before being sold into slavery. The few women who joined pirate crews did so because their alternatives were even worse: prostitution, domestic servitude, or death in childbirth as some man's property. And Bonnie and Mary Red are celebrated today as feminist icons, but they earned their freedom by proving they could kill as efficiently as any man. The economics of piracy were built on human misery. Pirates didn't seek treasure because they loved gold. They sought it because precious metals were the only currency that held value across borders, the only wealth that couldn't be traced or taxed by authorities. But most pirate raids yielded mundane cargo: cloth, spices, tools, and human beings. The slave trade was often more profitable than treasure hunting, and pirates supplied markets from Barbados to Madagascar with fresh captives taken from merchant vessels. Navigation in the age of sail was a deadly gamble. Pirates operated without accurate charts, relying on dead reckoning and landmarks that could be obscured by weather. Many crews died not from battle, but from starvation after becoming lost at sea, their bones joining the millions already resting on ocean floors. Others crashed onto reefs in darkness, their screams swallowed by waves as wooden ships splintered like matchsticks. The golden age of piracy lasted barely 30 years because it was economically unsustainable. Pirates were parasites feeding on maritime trade, and like all parasites, they eventually weakened their host to the point of collapse. As merchant shipping became too dangerous, trade routes shifted, insurance costs skyrocketed, and naval patrols increased. The party ended when the British Empire decided that maintaining commerce was more important than tolerating colorful criminals. So forget Johnny Depp's charming rogue with perfect teeth and witty dialogue. The real pirates were broken men who chose brutality because civilization had broken them first. They lived short, violent lives in floating hellholes that would have made medieval peasants grateful for their hovels. And they died as they lived, violently, painfully, and far from home, their bodies feeding the fish while their souls answered for crimes committed under the endless blue sky. The rope still creaks at execution dock. The tide still rises to claim its due. And somewhere in the darkness between waves, the ghosts of 10,000 pirates whisper the truth that no adventure story wants to tell. The sea always collects its debts, and the price of freedom on the water is paid in blood. Chapter 2: Ancient Seas of Blood, the Prehistoric Origins of Maritime Terror. The first pirates had no names. They left no records, carved no Jolly Rogers, built no legends. What they left was ash, burning cities along Mediterranean coastlines, empty harbors where thriving ports once stood, and the scattered bones of civilizations they helped destroy. Long before anyone heard of Blackbeard or Bartholomew Roberts, humans were already perfecting the art of maritime murder. The bronze gleams dully in the morning sun as oars cut through dark water. These aren't merchant vessels approaching your coastal settlement. These are floating tombs filled with armed killers who have come for everything you own. Your grain stores, your livestock, your children to sell in distant slave markets, and your life if you resist. The sea peoples, as historians call them, materialized from the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE like a plague of locusts with sails. They destroyed the Hittite Empire. They burned Egyptian coastal cities. They turned the Bronze Age collapse from a gradual decline into a catastrophic avalanche, sailing from harbor to harbor with their families in tow, carrying everything they owned because they had no homeland left to defend. These weren't pirates in the romantic sense. They were desperate refugees who had weaponized their displacement, turning survival into systematic slaughter. Egyptian records speak of battles where the sea itself turned red with blood. Ramesses III fought naval engagements against these maritime nomads, but even his victories came at crushing cost. The Sea Peoples didn't fight like civilized armies. They fought like cornered animals, women and children aboard their ships, wielding weapons alongside warriors, because defeat meant extinction for entire tribes. The screams echo across centuries. In Cilicia, along what is now the Turkish coast, piracy evolved from desperate raids into organized crime. Cilician pirates didn't just steal cargo, they perfected the slave trade, capturing Roman citizens and selling them in markets from Egypt to Spain. They built fortified harbors and mountain caves, created their own currency, and maintained fleets that could challenge imperial navies. Julius Caesar himself felt their touch. Captured at age 25 while traveling to Rhodes, he spent 38 days among pirates who demanded 20 talents of silver for his release. Caesar laughed at the sum. Too small for someone of his importance, he declared, raising his own ransom to 50 talents. But he also promised to return and crucify every one of them. The pirates thought it was a joke. They died learning otherwise. The crucifixes lined the Cilician coast like a forest of agony, each one bearing a pirate Caesar had ordered nailed to wood. But first, in a gesture of mercy, he had their throats cut. Quick deaths for men who had shown him courtesy during his captivity. It was both brutal and personal. The future dictator of Rome settling accounts with interest. But the Romans learned something crucial from their battles with pirates. Maritime crime wasn't just about individual criminals. It was about failed states, collapsed economies, and desperate populations turning to the sea when the land offered only death. Pompey's campaign against Mediterranean piracy in 67 BCE wasn't just about hunting down criminals. It was about rebuilding coastal economies, resettling pirate communities, and addressing the root causes that turned farmers into sea wolves. The waters around Crete tell darker stories still. Pirates based on that mountainous island perfected techniques that would be used for millennia. Night raids on sleeping settlements, human trafficking networks that span the Mediterranean, and torture methods designed to extract information about hidden treasures. They sold Roman senators' daughters to Egyptian brothels and crucified merchant captains who refused to reveal where their gold was hidden. Phoenician merchants, history's greatest traders, learned to travel in armed convoys because lone ships were floating targets. Their vessels carried not just trade goods, but soldiers, weapons, and fortified areas where crew could make final stands. The beautiful Mediterranean, cradle of civilization, became a hunting ground where merchant ships raced between safe harbors while pirates lurked behind every island, waiting for victims. The dark waters hold older secrets still. Before Rome, before Greece, before written history began, humans were already learning that the sea offered both transportation and opportunity for those willing to kill for it. Archaeological evidence suggests that maritime raiding was as old as seafaring itself. Stone Age coastal settlements show signs of violent destruction, buried treasures hidden from seaborne raiders, and fortifications designed to repel attacks from the water. Even the earliest myths hint at this aquatic violence. The Odyssey isn't just an adventure story. It's a catalog of Mediterranean piracy techniques. The Cyclops who eats travelers, the sirens who lure ships onto rocks, the lotus eaters who drug and enslave visitors. These weren't fantasy monsters, but poetic descriptions of real dangers that awaited ancient mariners. Pirates in antiquity understood something that modern criminals often miss. Fear was more valuable than violence. A reputation for cruelty could make enemies surrender without fighting, saving pirates the cost of battle while maintaining their fearsome image. They crucified captives where other ships could see the bodies, burned coastal settlements as warnings to neighbors, and spread stories of their brutality to make future raids easier. The slave markets of antiquity were fed by maritime raiders who understood that human cargo was often more valuable than gold. A skilled artisan, literate scribe, or beautiful woman could be worth their weight in silver. Pirates became expert judges of human value, sorting captives like livestock and calculating profit margins on human misery. Roman naval power eventually crushed organized piracy in the Mediterranean, but the victory came at enormous cost. Hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, and decades of coordinated effort were required to make the sea safe for commerce. Even then, pirates simply moved to new hunting grounds: the Black Sea, Atlantic coasts, and distant waters beyond Roman reach. The ancient world learned a lesson that echoes through history. The sea belongs to no one and everyone. Civilizations might control coastlines, but the deep water remained a lawless frontier where strength determined right and mercy was a luxury that dead men couldn't afford. The first pirates established patterns that would endure for millennia: mobility as advantage, fear as weapon, and the eternal truth that desperate people will do anything to survive. Chapter 3: Viking Longships and Liquid Nightmares when the North Sea ran red. The morning mist clings to Lindisfarne like a funeral shroud. Brother Higbald tends the illuminated manuscripts in the monastery scriptorium, his quills scratching across vellum as he copies sacred texts. The date is June 8th, 793 CE. In a few hours, this peaceful island will birth a nightmare that will haunt Europe for 3 centuries. Dragon heads emerge from the fog first, carved prows cutting through morning stillness like the snouts of sea monsters. The longships slide onto the beach with barely a whisper, their shallow drafts allowing them to appear where no ships should be able to land. 50 warriors pour onto the sand, axes glinting, shields locked, moving with the fluid precision of a wolf pack that has done this before. The monks have no weapons. They have no training. They have prayer, and prayer dies screaming when the first axe splits Brother Higbald's skull like driftwood. The Vikings move through the monastery like a plague, killing some, capturing others, loading their ships with gold crucifixes, silver chalices, and human cargo that will fetch good prices in Dublin slave markets. But this isn't random violence, it's business. The Vikings didn't just raid. They revolutionized maritime terror through superior technology, tactical brilliance, and a cultural embrace of violence that turned warfare into religious experience. Their longships could navigate rivers that defeated Roman galleys, appear without warning on coastlines thought unreachable, and disappear before any defense could be mounted. The ships hold stinks of fear and vomit. Chained in the darkness below deck, you realize your new reality. You are cargo now, your value measured in silver ounces at the next slave market. The Vikings above argue in their harsh language about wind and tide, but their destination is clear: Dublin, where Irish and Norse merchants have built the largest slave trading center in Northern Europe. Viking raids weren't crime, they were economics. Scandinavia's thin soil and harsh climate couldn't support growing populations, but superior shipbuilding technology offered an alternative. Why farm marginal land when you could harvest wealth from richer neighbors? Why trade fairly when you could simply take what you needed? The mathematics of murder were simple. A Viking longship carrying 50 warriors could capture cargo worth hundreds of times their investment. Monasteries were particularly attractive targets. Isolated, wealthy, defenseless communities filled with precious objects and educated slaves who commanded premium prices. The monks' very pacifism made them ideal victims. Their Christian doctrine of turning the other cheek was interpreted by Vikings as invitation to keep striking until both cheeks were bleeding. The berserkers arrived last, foam flecking their beards, eyes rolled back white, howling like animals possessed by gods of war. They fight naked except for bare skins, feeling no pain, knowing no fear, cutting down enemies until their axes stick in bone, and they must pull their weapons free to kill again. These aren't soldiers. They're shamanic warriors channeling divine madness into human slaughter. But Viking society was more complex than simple brutality suggests. Their raids funded sophisticated trading networks that stretched from Greenland to Constantinople. They weren't just destroyers. They were also explorers, settlers, and merchants who established cities, created trade routes, and even served as mercenaries protecting the very civilizations they raided. The longship's construction reveals their genius. Clinker-bill hulls flexed with ocean swells rather than fighting them. Shallow drafts allowed navigation of rivers and streams that other vessels couldn't access. Square sails caught following winds, while oars provided power for complex maneuvers. These ships were tools of war, disguised as transportation, capable of carrying warriors thousands of miles to strike targets that thought themselves safe. England's coastline becomes a wound that never heals. Viking raids escalate from seasonal nuisances to permanent occupation. They establish the Danelaw, controlling northern and eastern England through superior military organization and political cunning. What began as piracy evolved into conquest, as Viking leaders realized that controlling territory was more profitable than simply raiding it. The slave chains rattle in the hold as another human cargo ship departs for markets in Kiev, Constantinople, or Cordoba. The Vikings have turned human trafficking into an industrial enterprise, with established routes, regular schedules, and standardized prices. Irish slaves work Icelandic farms. English slaves serve Byzantine nobles. The entire North Atlantic becomes a transportation network for human misery. Christianity meant nothing to men who worshiped gods of war and death. When Vikings sacked monasteries, they weren't committing sacrilege. They were harvesting resources from enemies whose god had failed to protect them. Viking religion celebrated violence as divine service, and every successful raid proved that Odin smiled upon his faithful warriors. The Blood Eagle was reserved for special enemies, captured kings and jarls who needed to die in ways that honored the gods while terrifying survivors. The victim's ribs were cut from the spine and pulled outward like wings, while lungs were torn out still beating. It was medical precision applied to religious torture, anatomy lesson, and sacrifice combined in a spectacle that witnesses would never forget. But the sea that made them rich also made them vulnerable. As European kingdoms developed naval capabilities and coastal defenses, Viking advantages diminished. Larger ships, professional armies, and fortified harbors began turning predators into prey. The last great Viking expedition ends at Stamford Bridge in 1066, where King Harald Hardrada dies with an arrow through his throat, and the age of Viking piracy drowns in English mud. The longships rot on beaches like beached whales, their dragon heads staring blindly at gray skies. The warriors who once terrorized Europe lie buried under foreign soil, their axes rusted, their names forgotten by all except historians. But their legacy endures in every coastal fortification, every naval tradition, every maritime law designed to prevent the sea from becoming highway for human predators. Viking piracy established templates that endure today: mobility as tactical advantage, terror as psychological weapon, and the eternal truth that civilizations are only as strong as their ability to defend their borders from those who have nothing left to lose. Chapter 4: Barbary Coast, the Islamic Slave Empire. The Mediterranean dawn breaks blood red over Sail, Morocco, but the color isn't from the sunrise. It's from the Christian slaves hauling water up from the harbor, their backs flayed raw by the overseer's whip, their blood mixing with salt water as they stumble across limestone quays. For 3 centuries, this scene repeats daily along the Barbary Coast, where North African pirates have built an empire on European flesh. You wake to the sound of oars cutting water, dozens of them, synchronized like a heartbeat. But this isn't your heartbeat anymore. Chained to a bench in the galley of a Barbary corsair, you are muscle and bone in service of Islamic jihad against Christian lands. Your back bleeds from yesterday's lashing. Your wrists are worn raw by iron shackles. And somewhere behind you, the Moroccan captain laughs as he calculates your value in the slave markets of Tunis. This isn't piracy as Europeans understood it. This is state-sponsored terrorism disguised as religious warfare. The Barbary states of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Tripoli have turned Mediterranean raiding into a theological imperative, a holy war funded by human trafficking and sanctified by Islamic scholars who declare that enslaving Christians serves Allah's will. The numbers tell a story of systematic horror. Between 1500 and 1800, Barbary pirates captured and enslaved over 1 million Europeans. Entire coastal villages in Spain, Italy, France, and Ireland were abandoned as populations fled inland from the Corsair raids. The English fishing village of Baltimore was completely depopulated in a single-night raid in 1631, its entire population dragged away in chains to North African slave markets. The raiding season begins each spring when winter storms subside and the Corsair fleets emerge from Barbary harbors like demons from hell. Their ships are hybrids, Mediterranean galleys powered by enslaved Christian rowers, rigged with lateen sails for speed, armed with cannons for intimidation. They hunt in packs, surrounding merchant vessels and isolated fishing boats with tactical precision learned through generations of maritime predation. Resistance is suicide. The Corsairs have perfected psychological warfare, spreading stories of their cruelty to make future victims surrender without fighting. Those who resist face fates worse than death, flaying alive, impalement, or the favorite Barbary punishment of being sewn into fresh animal hides and left in the sun to die as the leather contracts and crushes bone. The slave markets of Algiers reveal the industrial scale of Christian suffering. Naked Europeans stand on auction blocks while Barbary merchants examine their teeth, muscles, and scars like livestock. Strong men go to the galleys or construction projects. Beautiful women disappear into harems. Children are converted to Islam and trained as Janissary soldiers who will one day raid the very countries of their birth. But the Corsairs aren't random criminals. They're state employees serving Islamic governments that view slave raiding as both profitable enterprise and religious duty. The Dey of Algiers, the Bey of Tunis, and the Sultan of Morocco all take percentages of Corsair profits while providing safe harbors, supplies, and political protection. This is legalized piracy on a scale that dwarfs anything seen in the Caribbean. The renegades make everything worse. These are European Christians who have converted to Islam and joined the Corsair fleets, bringing intimate knowledge of European defenses, languages, and customs to their new Muslim masters. Some are motivated by greed, others by desperation, but all become traitors to their own blood in service of Barbary profits. The galley slaves suffer deaths that last for years. Chained to benches in pairs, they row in shifts that never end, fed on scraps, beaten for any sign of weakness, dying slowly from exhaustion, disease, and despair. When they finally expire, their bodies are simply thrown overboard and replaced with fresh captives from the next raid. European coastal defenses adapt to the Corsair threat through architectural evolution. Watchtowers spring up along Mediterranean shores, their beacons warning of approaching pirates. Churches are fortified with gun emplacements. Entire towns relocate inland, abandoning centuries-old harbors to the raiders. The beautiful Mediterranean becomes a frontier of fear where no Christian feels safe near the water. The Knights of Malta fight a centuries-long war against Barbary pirates, their galleys hunting corsairs across waters turned into a religious battlefield. But the Knights are hopelessly outnumbered, their victories temporary interruptions in the larger tragedy of Islamic slave raiding. For every corsair galley they sink, 3 more emerge from Barbary harbors to continue the harvest of human cargo. Some captives find opportunity in slavery. European craftsmen, scholars, and renegades who embrace Islam can rise high in Barbary society, becoming corsair captains, government officials, or wealthy merchants. But these success stories only emphasize the horror facing those who refuse to abandon their faith. Endless slavery, punctuated by brutal death. The seasonal rhythm of slave raiding creates its own calendar of terror. Spring brings the corsair fleets out of harbor. Summer sees the peak raiding season as favorable winds allow deep penetration into European waters. Autumn brings the slave ships home loaded with human cargo. Winter offers temporary respite as storms force the pirates back to port. But each spring, the cycle begins again. European governments prove incapable of protecting their own citizens. Naval patrols are too expensive to maintain year-round. Diplomatic negotiations with Barbary rulers collapse as soon as new raids prove profitable. Ransom payments to free captives only encourage more kidnapping. The Mediterranean becomes a highway of human misery that no Christian power can police effectively. The Barbary pirates represent the final flowering of Islamic maritime power, a last crusade fought with cannon and chain rather than sword and faith. They transform piracy from mere crime into holy war, proving that the Mediterranean's ancient waters could still run red with the blood of those who dared sail them without adequate protection. Only Napoleon's conquest of Egypt and the American Navy's bombardment of Tripoli would finally break the power of the Barbary states, ending 3 centuries of Islamic slave raiding that had terrorized Christian Europe and turned the cradle of civilization into a graveyard of faith. Chapter 5. Chinese Pirate Empires, Dragons of the South China Sea. The junk's black sails blot out the morning sun as 80,000 pirates prepare for war. This isn't a ragtag band of desperate criminals. This is the Red Flag Fleet, the largest naval force in the world, commanded by a woman who rose from brothel to imperial palace through cunning, violence, and an iron will that bent the South China Sea to her desires. Shi Yang stands on the flagship's deck, her silk robes rustling in the wind, watching as her armada stretches to the horizon like a floating city of organized death. You are a merchant captain, and your worst nightmare is about to begin. The Pearl River Delta has become a highway of extortion where every vessel pays tribute to the pirate confederation or feeds the fish. Your cargo holds rice, silk, and silver, wealth that will fund this maritime empire for another season of controlled chaos. But resistance means something worse than death. It means becoming an example for other merchants who might consider defying the Dragon Lady's authority. Chinese piracy wasn't crime, it was governance. For over 6 centuries, from the Song Dynasty through the Qing Empire, organized pirate fleets controlled vast stretches of China's coastline, collecting taxes, issuing safe conduct passes, and maintaining their own laws, currencies, and administrative systems. They weren't criminals parasiting on legitimate commerce. They were alternative governments competing with imperial authority for control of maritime trade. The Confederation system transforms piracy into bureaucracy. The Red Flag Fleet alone commands 300 junks and controls 20,000 pirates. But it's just one of 6 color-coded fleets that divide the South China Sea like feudal territories. Red, yellow, green, blue, white, and black flags each control specific waters, with strict boundaries, diplomatic protocols, and mutual defense agreements. Pirates who violate territorial agreements face punishment more severe than anything imperial courts could devise. Shi Yang's rise reads like a fairy tale written in blood. Born to poverty, sold into prostitution, married to a pirate captain, widowed by violence. She seized control of her husband's fleet through political brilliance that would have impressed Machiavelli. When rival captains challenged her authority, she eliminated them through assassination, bribery, or superior tactical planning. When the Qing Navy threatened her territory, she outmaneuvered imperial admirals who had studied warfare in books while she learned it from corpses floating in harbor water. The pirate codes governing these fleets make European articles seem like children's games. Death for desertion. Death for rape without permission. Death for disobeying orders during battle. But also guaranteed shares of plunder, democratic election of officers, and compensation for battle injuries. These aren't desperate criminals. They're professional military organizations with discipline that would impress regular naval forces. Taxation becomes art under pirate administration. Merchant vessels receive official receipts for tribute payments, stamped documents that guarantee safe passage through Confederation waters. Fishing boats pay seasonal licenses. Coastal towns purchase protection contracts. The pirates even issue currency, specially minted coins accepted throughout the Pearl River Delta, because they're backed by naval power rather than imperial decree. The Imperial Navy proves hopelessly outmatched. Qing warships are built for prestige rather than combat. Their crews recruited from landlubbers who barely know port from starboard. When they engage pirate fleets, the battles are slaughters. Pirate junks use shallow drafts to lure imperial vessels into coastal waters where superior seamanship and local knowledge provide overwhelming advantages. Captured naval officers face choices between conversion to piracy or death by drowning. But Shi Yang understands something that destroys most pirate leaders: when to negotiate. As imperial pressure increases and Portuguese warships enter Chinese waters, she recognizes that military victory isn't sustainable against combined enemies. Instead of fighting to the death, she opens diplomatic channels with Qing officials, offering to transform her pirates into imperial naval forces in exchange for amnesty, rank, and continued control of maritime trade. The negotiations reveal piracy's ultimate evolution. Shi Yang doesn't surrender. She merges her organization with the imperial government, becoming an admiral in the Qing Navy while maintaining operational control of her fleets. Her officers receive official commissions. Her ships become auxiliary naval vessels. Her taxation system continues under imperial blessing. Its conquest disguised as capitulation, piracy legitimized through bureaucratic paperwork. The human cost of pirate governance never appears in official records. Villages that refuse tribute payments are burned as examples. Merchant crews who resist taxation are tortured until they reveal hidden cargo. Coastal populations live in terror of pirate justice, which ranges from fines for minor infractions to public executions for serious crimes. The South China Sea becomes a police state patrolled by armed junks whose captains serve as judge, jury, and executioner. European observers struggle to comprehend the scale of Chinese pirate organization. These aren't individual ships raiding merchant vessels. These are floating nations with populations larger than most European cities. The Red Flag Fleet alone controls more territory than many kingdoms, collects more revenue than some national governments, and maintains better military discipline than most regular armies. The Pirate Confederation's diplomatic sophistication matches its military power. Treaties between different colored fleets establish territorial boundaries, trade regulations, and mutual defense agreements. When Portuguese warships attack Red Flag vessels, other Confederation fleets provide military support according to formal alliance obligations. These pirates conduct international relations with the same complexity as sovereign nations. But success contains the seeds of destruction. As pirate fleets grow larger and more organized, they become less mobile and more vulnerable to coordinated attack. Imperial forces learn to exploit territorial divisions between different fleets, turning pirates against each other through careful diplomacy. The Confederation that once seemed invincible fragments into competing factions that exhaust themselves through civil warfare. Shi Yang's retirement marks the end of an era. She negotiates her way out of piracy with the same brilliance that built her empire, accepting imperial rank while secretly maintaining control of maritime trade networks. Her story proves that Chinese piracy was never about individual criminals seeking personal wealth. It was about alternative forms of governance that competed with imperial authority for control of the world's most profitable waterways. The South China Sea returns to imperial control, but the Pirate Confederation's legacy endures in administrative systems, trade networks, and governmental structures that survive long after the last pirate junk disappears below the horizon. They proved that organized crime, given sufficient scale and sophistication, could evolve into legitimate governance, and that the line between piracy and politics was often thinner than the water that separated them. Chapter 6: The Spanish Main, Gold, Gore, and Galleons. The treasure fleet's sails appear on the horizon like clouds heavy with gold. 50 Spanish galleons lumber northward from Cartagena, their holds groaning under the weight of Peruvian silver, Mexican gold, and gems torn from Aztec temples by conquistadors who turned genocide into commerce. But predators circle these floating fortunes like sharks around wounded whales. English sea dogs, French corsairs, and Dutch rebels all hunger for Spanish blood and New World treasure. You are a Spanish merchant aboard the San Pedro, and your nightmare begins when the English privateer ships emerge from behind the island where they've been waiting like spiders in a web. Francis Drake's Golden Hind cuts through Caribbean waters with the grace of a hunting cat, her bronze cannons gleaming in tropical sunlight. Behind her come a dozen more predators, their crews singing hymns as they prepare to rob and kill in service of Protestant England and personal profit. The Spanish Main becomes history's greatest crime scene as European powers use piracy to wage undeclared war against Spanish dominance in the New World. These aren't common criminals. They're state-sponsored terrorists operating under letters of marque that transform theft into patriotic duty. English privateers serve Queen Elizabeth while robbing Spanish treasure ships. French corsairs raid in the name of Catholic France while slaughtering Catholic Spaniards. Dutch rebels attack Spanish commerce while calling it liberation. The mathematics of maritime murder are intoxicating. A single treasure galleon carries wealth equivalent to entire European national budgets. The Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, captured by Thomas Cavendish in 1587, yields enough gold and silver to fund English naval operations for 3 years. When Drake completes his circumnavigation in 1580, his investors receive returns of 4,700% on their initial investment. Violence has never been more profitable, but Spanish treasure doesn't flow freely. It travels under armed escort that turns Caribbean waters into a battlefield. The flota system combines merchant vessels with naval escorts and convoys designed to overwhelm individual raiders through superior firepower. Galleons bristle with bronze cannons, their crews trained for combat rather than commerce. When pirates attack these floating fortresses, the battles produce casualty rates that rival major land engagements. The sack of Nombre de Dios reveals the human cost of treasure hunting. Drake's raiders stormed the Spanish port in 1573, killing defenders and looting warehouses filled with silver waiting for transport to Europe. But Spanish resistance is fierce, and English casualties mount as the raid becomes a house-to-house slaughter. Drake himself nearly bleeds to death from a leg wound, saved only by emergency amputation performed with a rusty blade while Spanish reinforcements approach. Cartagena burns like a vision of hell as English pirates demonstrate that terror is more effective than taxation. Howard's fleet systematically destroys Spanish fortifications, churches, and civilian buildings while demanding ransom for the city itself. Spanish residents who can't pay tribute are tortured until they reveal hidden wealth or die from the interrogation. The beautiful Caribbean port becomes a smoking ruin where corpses float in the harbor among the ashes of civilization built on Aztec gold. The Spanish response creates a maritime arms race that militarizes the entire Caribbean. New fortress cities rise at strategic points, their walls designed to withstand naval bombardment. Spanish treasure fleets double their escort vessels, turning merchant convoys into floating armies. Coastal towns relocate inland, abandoning harbors to raiders while creating overland transport routes that bypass dangerous waters entirely. But Spanish countermeasures spawn new forms of maritime violence. As treasure fleets become too well defended for direct attack, pirates turn to devastating coastal raids that terrorize civilian populations. Henry Morgan's assault on Panama in 1671 demonstrates the evolution of Caribbean piracy from sea-based robbery to land-based warfare. His buccaneers march across the isthmus like a conquering army, burning towns and torturing civilians while Spanish authorities prove incapable of effective resistance. The torture chambers of Portobello echo with screams that reveal piracy's true nature. Spanish prisoners are suspended over burning coals, have their limbs crushed in improvised vices, or slowly flayed alive until they reveal where treasure is hidden. Pirates have perfected interrogation techniques that combine medical knowledge with sadistic creativity, turning human anatomy into a roadmap of pain designed to extract information from unwilling subjects. Religious warfare adds theological justification to maritime terrorism. Protestant pirates view attacks on Catholic Spain as divine service, believing that God smiles upon violence against papist heretics. Spanish defenders see pirate raids as demonic assault on Christian civilization, justifying any brutality against Protestant devils. The Caribbean becomes a religious battlefield where theological differences are settled with cutlass and cannon rather than scholarly debate. The economics of Spanish treasure create their own geography of violence. Pirates establish bases on remote islands where they can careen ships, treat wounded, and divide plunder without interference from colonial authorities. Tortuga, Jamaica, and the Bahamas become criminal republics where violence is currency and murder is law. These island hideouts evolve into trading posts where pirates exchange stolen goods for supplies, creating parallel economies based entirely on theft. But Spanish gold carries a curse that destroys everyone it touches. Pirates who capture treasure fleets often die from diseases contracted in tropical ports, fighting over division of spoils, or execution by authorities who grow tired of maritime terrorism. Spanish colonists live in constant fear of raids that can destroy generations of accumulated wealth in a single night. Even successful privateers like Drake die miserably from dysentery, their bodies rotting in Caribbean waters that have already claimed thousands of their victims. The Treaty of Madrid in 1670 attempts to end the Caribbean's reign of terror by recognizing English sovereignty over Jamaica in exchange for suppressing piracy. But violence has become too profitable to eliminate through diplomatic agreements. Pirates simply move to new hunting grounds. Colonial officials continue commissioning raids against enemy commerce, and the Spanish Main remains a graveyard of empires built on stolen gold. The legacy of Spanish Main piracy extends far beyond individual crimes. It establishes patterns of maritime terrorism that will persist for centuries, proves that violence can be more profitable than trade, and demonstrates that weak states become hunting grounds for stronger neighbors willing to use unofficial warfare. The Caribbean's beautiful waters run red with blood spilled for Spanish gold, and the stain never quite washes clean. Chapter 7: Buccaneers, the Birth of Caribbean Terror. The smell hits you first, rotting meat mixed with wood smoke and human sweat, drifting across Tortuga's harbor like a promise of violence to come. These aren't ordinary sailors stumbling through the port's muddy streets. These are buccaneers, Wild men who learned to hunt on Hispaniola's mountains before they learned to hunt on Caribbean seas. Their hands are stained with blood from butchering cattle, their faces scarred by Spanish bullets, their souls hardened by years of running from civilization that wanted them dead. The Buchan fires never stop burning, day and night. Smoke rises from the meat-curing platforms where former cattle hunters perfect the art of preservation that will feed their transformation into maritime predators. These French refugees fleeing Spanish persecution on Hispaniola have learned to live like animals, hunting wild cattle and pigs with muskets while Spanish cavalry patrols seek to exterminate them like vermin. But persecution has forged them into something harder than steel. Men with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from violence. Pierre Legrand makes history with a single desperate act that transforms Caribbean piracy forever. Leading 28 half-starved buccaneers in a leaking boat, he approaches a Spanish treasure galleon flying false colors. When close enough to board, his men throw themselves onto the Spanish deck like demons unleashed from hell, seizing one of the richest ships in the Spanish fleet through pure audacity and berserker fury. The treasure they capture funds the transformation of Tortuga from refugee camp to pirate republic. The Brotherhood of the Coast emerges from shared suffering and mutual dependence. Buccaneers who survive Spanish persecution, tropical disease, and maritime violence form bonds stronger than blood or nationality. French, English, and Dutch outcasts unite under democratic principles that would be revolutionary in European courts: equality among members, elected leadership, and shared ownership of plunder. These aren't noble ideals, but survival strategies developed by men who know that cooperation means life and betrayal means death. Henry Morgan emerges from this violent democracy as history's most successful pirate general, a man who transforms Caribbean raiding from random violence into organized warfare. His assault on Portobello in 1668 demonstrates the evolution of buccaneer tactics from ship-to-ship combat to amphibious assault on fortified positions. Using human shields composed of captured priests and nuns, Morgan's forces storm Spanish strongholds while their enemies hesitate to fire on consecrated hostages. The march to Panama becomes a nightmare of tropical warfare that proves buccaneers have evolved beyond simple piracy into something approaching military conquest. Morgan leads 2,000 men across the isthmus through jungle that kills Europeans with disease, Spanish ambushes, and starvation. But buccaneer discipline holds through hardships that would break regular armies. They eat leather when food runs out, drink their own urine when water fails, and keep marching because returning empty-handed means poverty worse than death. Panama burns like a vision of apocalypse as buccaneers demonstrate that no Spanish stronghold is beyond their reach. The richest city in the Americas falls to men who began as cattle hunters, its walls breached by artillery captured from previous raids, its population subjected to tortures that extract hidden wealth from terrified civilians. Spanish authorities who once dismissed buccaneers as minor nuisances now face the reality that their entire colonial empire is vulnerable to attack. But buccaneers' success contains the seeds of its own destruction. As raids become larger and more organized, they attract attention from European governments that view unauthorized warfare as threats to diplomatic stability. The Treaty of Madrid forces England to suppress pirate activities that had previously enjoyed royal approval. France recalls governors who commissioned raids against Spanish commerce. Spain rebuilds its colonial defenses with fortifications designed to withstand buccaneer assault. The women of Tortuga reveal the brutal reality behind romantic pirate legends. These aren't adventurous ladies seeking equality. They're prostitutes, refugees, and criminals fleeing various forms of European persecution. They serve buccaneer bases as cooks, lovers, and occasionally fighters, but always under male authority that views them as property to be shared rather than partners in democratic brotherhood. Female life in pirate ports is often shorter and more brutal than female life in European slums. Buccaneer governance creates the first democratic institutions in the New World, but democracy built on violence produces its own forms of tyranny. Leaders are elected by popular vote, but leadership often depends on ability to organize successful raids rather than administrative competence. Justice is dispensed by majority rule, but the majority consists of armed criminals whose definition of justice might include torture, marooning, or summary execution for relatively minor offenses. The turtle hunters of the Cayman Islands represent buccaneer evolution into legitimate commerce, proving that piracy can transform into respectable trade when circumstances permit. Former raiders become suppliers of turtle meat and shells to colonial markets, using skills developed through maritime violence to build legal businesses. But the transition isn't smooth. Old habits of violence persist, and disputes are often settled with blade and pistol rather than colonial courts. Buccaneer medicine develops techniques that won't appear in European surgery for decades. Men who perform battlefield amputations with rusty cutlasses learn anatomy through practical experience that university-trained physicians lack. They develop treatments for tropical diseases through trial and error, create prosthetics from ship materials, and perfect pain-killing techniques using captured Spanish brandy and indigenous plant medicines. The Code of the Coast becomes a legal system that governs criminal behavior through democratic consensus rather than royal decree. Buccaneer articles establish rules for sharing plunder, compensating battle injuries, and punishing crimes against the Brotherhood. These aren't noble principles, but practical guidelines developed by men who understand that survival depends on maintaining unity among natural predators who would otherwise kill each other. Religious warfare gives buccaneers ideological justification for activities that would otherwise be simple criminal enterprises. Protestant raiders view attacks on Catholic Spain as holy service, while Catholic French buccaneers justify violence against Spanish heretics who oppress fellow Catholics. The Caribbean becomes a theological battlefield where religious differences are settled through maritime terrorism rather than scholarly debate. The end of the buccaneering era arrives not through military defeat, but through economic evolution. As colonial populations grow and trade becomes more valuable than raiding, Caribbean governments find it more profitable to suppress piracy than to encourage it. Former buccaneers become plantation owners, colonial officials, or naval officers serving the same governments they once threatened. Their legacy survives in democratic traditions, military techniques, and cultural attitudes that persist long after the last boucan fire burns out. Chapter 8: The Pirate Republic, Nassau's Criminal Paradise. The harbor at Nassau stretches before you like a fever dream of organized chaos. 47 pirate ships ride at anchor in waters that no law governs except the democracy of violence. Their crews stumble through streets that reek of rum, vomit, and human waste while arguing over shares of plunder taken from merchant vessels that now rest on the seabed with their crews. This is New Providence Island in 1715, where England's failed colonial experiment has evolved into history's most successful criminal republic. The Walking Purchase reveals how legitimate government transformed into pirate paradise through bureaucratic incompetence and imperial neglect. English proprietors sold land grants to colonists who never arrived, collected taxes on properties that didn't exist, and appointed governors who govern nothing but empty beaches. When the Spanish burned Nassau in 1703, they did London a favor by eliminating the pretense of civilization from an island that had already reverted to prehistoric violence. Henry Jennings makes the transition from privateer to pirate with mathematical precision that transforms Caribbean crime forever. When the War of Spanish Succession ends in 1713, he faces the choice between poverty and piracy. His solution creates the template for organized maritime terrorism. Use wartime experience to organize unemployed sailors, capture heavily laden Spanish treasure ships, and establish secure bases where authorities can't interfere with criminal activities. The Flying Gang emerges from Nassau's democratic chaos as history's most effective criminal organization. Unlike traditional pirate crews organized around single charismatic leaders, the gang operates as a confederation of independent captains who coordinate attacks, share intelligence, and provide mutual defense against naval forces. When Benjamin Hornigold, Edward Teach, Charles Vane, and Calico Jack synchronize their operations, no merchant vessel in the Western Atlantic is safe from coordinated assault. Blackbeard's apprenticeship under Hornigold demonstrates how Nassau transforms maritime violence from random crime into professional military operation. Edward Teach learns navigation, gunnery, and crew management while serving as quartermaster aboard Hornigold's ship. But he also learns psychological warfare techniques that will make his reputation more terrifying than his actual violence. The burning hemp in his beard, the multiple pistols, the demonic appearance that makes merchant crews surrender without fighting. The pirate economy of Nassau operates according to principles that would revolutionize European finance if applied to legitimate commerce. Captured goods are immediately liquidated through auction systems that establish fair market values for stolen merchandise. Credit networks allow captains to finance expeditions against future plunder. Insurance cooperatives compensate crews for battle injuries according to standardized schedules that recognize lost limbs, damaged organs, and permanent disabilities. Democracy in action reveals itself daily in Nassau's streets as armed criminals govern themselves through procedures that European philosophers only discuss in theoretical treatises. Pirate crews elect their officers through popular vote, with leadership positions rotating based on combat effectiveness and crew satisfaction. Major decisions require majority consent, while minority opinions are protected through elaborate systems of checks and balances designed to prevent tyrannical abuse of democratic authority. The trials of captured merchant crews demonstrate Nassau's evolution of justice beyond simple revenge towards something approaching legal procedure. Pirates conduct formal hearings before executing prisoners, allowing defendants to present evidence in their own defense, while juries of armed criminals deliberate guilt or innocence. The proceedings often end in acquittal for honest merchants while condemning those who abuse their crews or engage in activities that pirates consider morally reprehensible. Sexual democracy extends pirate egalitarianism into areas that European society refuses to acknowledge. Homosexual relationships among crew members are accepted as normal expressions of human need rather than capital crimes deserving death. Prostitutes enjoy protection and respect denied to them in colonial society. Female pirates like in Bonnie and Mary Red find opportunities for leadership and independence impossible in legitimate society, but available in criminal organizations that judge competence rather than gender. The fortification of Nassau transforms New Providence from a temporary refuge into a permanent challenge to British imperial authority. Pirates construct artillery emplacements that can sink naval vessels attempting to enter the harbor. They establish supply networks that provision their fleets with food, water, weapons, and ammunition purchased from corrupt colonial merchants. Most importantly, they create intelligence systems that provide advance warning of approaching naval forces. Education flourishes in Nassau as literate pirates establish schools that teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and navigation to illiterate crew members. Former university students share classical knowledge with reformed slaves who contribute African mathematical and astronomical traditions. These educational exchanges create the most cosmopolitan intellectual environment in the Caribbean, where ideas cross racial and national boundaries that remain rigid in legitimate colonial society. The Nassau Stock Exchange operates as a primitive futures market where pirates trade shares and planned expeditions, creating investment opportunities that attract legitimate merchants seeking higher returns than conventional commerce provides. Investors purchase shares in pirate voyages, while captains use advance funding to equip their vessels and recruit experienced crews. When expeditions succeed, profits are distributed according to shareholding agreements that recognize both monetary investment and combat participation. Medical advances in Nassau result from treating battle wounds that would kill patients in European hospitals lacking practical surgical experience. Pirate surgeons develop amputation techniques that minimize infection, create prosthetics that restore partial function to damaged limbs, and perfect painkillers that combine alcohol with plant medicines unknown to university-trained physicians. These innovations spread throughout the Caribbean as former pirates enter legitimate medical practice. The religious tolerance of Nassau creates a spiritual marketplace where Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Islamic, and indigenous beliefs compete for adherence among pirates who judge theological systems by their practical utility rather than institutional authority. This theological diversity produces hybrid religions that combine Christian morality with pagan magic, African spirituality with European rationalism, and indigenous shamanism with Islamic mysticism. But Nassau's criminal paradise contains contradictions that ensure its destruction. Success attracts attention from imperial authorities who view pirate republics as threats to colonial stability. Prosperity makes pirates soft and vulnerable to naval forces that retain military discipline. Most fatally, democracy among criminals produces factional violence as different crews compete for leadership of the confederation that made them powerful. The end approaches like a slow tide as British naval forces tighten their grip around Nassau's throat. Woodes Rogers arrives as royal governor with pardons for pirates willing to accept legitimate authority and death sentences for those who refuse. The golden age of piracy dies, not in glorious battle, but in bureaucratic transition as criminals choose respectability over rebellion, transforming from democratic predators into subjects of the crown they once defied. Chapter 9. Blackbeard, the Devil in Human Form. The hemp smolders in his beard like the fires of hell, casting Edward Teach's face in demonic shadows as he stalks across the deck of Queen Anne's Revenge. 6 loaded pistols hang from silk ribbons across his massive chest, their barrels gleaming in Caribbean sunlight like the fangs of some prehistoric beast. This isn't a man. This is nightmare made flesh, a creature spawned from the deepest fears of every merchant sailor who dares these waters. You are the captain of a tobacco merchant vessel, and your world ends when those familiar black sails appear on the horizon. The skull and crossbones snapping in the wind isn't just a flag. It's a death certificate waiting to be signed. Your crew abandons their duties to stare in paralyzed terror at the approaching demon ship, because everyone knows the stories. Everyone knows what Blackbeard does to those who resist. Edward Teach wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured by the violence of Queen Anne's War, shaped by years of legal privateering that taught him to kill for king and country before he learned to kill for himself. When peace broke out in 1713, it stripped away the patriotic veneer and revealed what lay beneath. A man so comfortable with violence that the transition from legal murder to illegal murder required no moral adjustment whatsoever. The psychological warfare begins long before the first shot is fired. Blackbeard's appearance is carefully crafted theater designed to paralyze enemies with terror. The burning hemp woven into his beard creates a hellish mask that makes him look like a demon emerging from smoke. Multiple pistols and cutlasses transform him into a walking arsenal. His enormous frame, draped in captured silk and stolen jewelry, proclaims his success at violence while promising the same fate to anyone foolish enough to resist. But beneath the theatrical terror lies calculated intelligence. Teach understands that reputation is more valuable than ammunition, that fear costs nothing while fighting costs lives and treasure. When merchant crews surrender at the sight of his flag, he's won without firing a shot. When captains hand over their cargo to avoid his legendary cruelty, he's earned maximum profit for minimum risk. Every tale of his brutality is an investment in future efficiency. The Queen Anne's Revenge herself is a floating fortress that embodies Blackbeard's evolution from common pirate to maritime warlord. Originally a French slave ship called La Concorde, she's been transformed into a 300-ton predator mounting 40 cannons and carrying a crew of 300 cutthroats. Her holds can carry enough supplies for extended cruises. Her armament can overpower any merchant vessel, and her intimidating silhouette strikes terror into anyone unfortunate enough to see her approaching. The blockade of Charleston demonstrates Blackbeard's strategic genius and reveals how individual piracy has evolved into economic warfare against entire colonies. For a week in May 1718, his fleet seals off one of America's busiest ports, capturing every vessel that attempts to enter or leave. The colonial government finds itself helpless against a criminal who operates with the efficiency of a naval commander and the ruthlessness of a sociopath. But the Charleston blockade also reveals Blackbeard's ultimate weakness, his dependence on medical supplies for his syphilis-ravaged crew. The Great Terror of the Caribbean is reduced to holding an entire city hostage for a chest of mercury and other drugs needed to treat venereal disease. It's a humbling reminder that even legendary pirates are mortal men subject to the diseases and decay that claim all flesh. The psychology of Blackbeard's crew reveals how maritime democracy functions under the rule of a charismatic psychopath. His men follow him not from loyalty, but from a combination of greed, fear, and lack of alternatives. They know that sharing his success means wealth beyond their wildest dreams, while opposing him means death in forms too creative for nightmares. It's voluntary slavery disguised as democratic brotherhood. The women captured by Blackbeard's crew face horrors that contemporary accounts barely hint at, but modern forensics can reconstruct. Rape was so routine that it barely merited mention in pirate confessions. Sexual slavery was considered a perk of pirate life, with attractive captives traded between crew members like playing cards. Those who resisted or tried to escape faced mutilation designed to serve as warnings to other prisoners. The torture techniques employed aboard pirate vessels reveal how desperate men can transform the human body into an instrument of interrogation. Capture merchants are subjected to sweating, being forced to run around the mainmast while pirates jab them with cutlass points. Others are wool dead, having rope twisted around their heads until their eyes bulge and skull fractures. The most unfortunate face keel hauling, where they're dragged under the ship's hull until barnacles strip flesh from bone. Blackbeard's relationship with colonial officials demonstrates the thin line between piracy and politics in early America. Governor Charles Eden of North Carolina provides him with legal pardons in exchange for shares of plunder. Corrupt customs officials issue forged documents that legitimize stolen cargo. Even respectable merchants purchase pirate goods at discount prices while maintaining plausible deniability about their origins. The final confrontation at Ocracoke Inlet reveals how the golden age of piracy ends. Not in glorious battle, but in bureaucratic determination to restore order. Lieutenant Robert Maynard's 2 sloops represent British imperial power finally committed to eliminating the pirate menace. The battle itself is brief and brutal. with Blackbeard falling only after receiving 25 wounds, including 5 pistol shots and numerous cutlass slashes. But even in death, Blackbeard serves the cause of terror. Maynard hangs the severed head from his bowsprit as proof of the kill and warning to other pirates that the age of maritime lawlessness is ending. The head allegedly swims around the ship 3 times before sinking, a final supernatural gesture from a man who spent his life convincing others he was more devil than human. The search for Blackbeard's treasure reveals the gulf between legend and reality. Despite decades of romantic speculation about buried chests and treasure maps, archaeological evidence suggests he died essentially broke. His wealth was invested in ships, weapons, and crew payments rather than hoarded for future retirement. The real treasure was the fear he generated, and that commodity died with him on a bloody deck in North Carolina waters. Blackbeard's legacy extends far beyond his brief career as history's most theatrical pirate. He established the template for maritime terrorism that emphasizes psychological warfare over physical violence, reputation over reality, and theater over tactics. His image, the burning beard, multiple weapons, demonic appearance, became the archetype that defines piracy in popular imagination centuries after his death. The irony of Edward Teach's story is that his greatest success was also his ultimate failure. By becoming too famous, too threatening, too effective at disrupting maritime trade, he made his own elimination inevitable. The British Empire that had ignored him as a minor nuisance was forced to destroy him when he became a major threat to colonial commerce and imperial authority. Chapter 10. Women Pirates, Deadlier Than the Devil. The cutlass whistles through salt air before biting deep into the Spanish sailor's shoulder, and Bonnie twists the blade with practiced precision that sends blood spattering across the deck like crimson rain. This isn't a woman defending her honor or fighting for her life. This is a predator who has chosen violence as profession, who kills with the same efficiency as her male crewmates and considerably more enthusiasm than most. You are a captured merchant sailor, cowering in the hold of Calico Jack's sloop, listening to the screams above as the female pirates demonstrate that cruelty knows no gender. The sounds of slaughter mix with laughter, not male laughter, but the higher-pitched voices of women who have discovered that murder can be intoxicating when society offers no other path to power. Mary Read's story begins in a London slum where gender is a luxury her family cannot afford. Born illegitimate to a woman already supporting one bastard child, Mary is disguised as her dead half-brother to continue collecting support payments from the boy's wealthy grandmother. She learns early that survival depends on deception, that feminine weakness is a death sentence in a world where only men can earn honest wages. The transformation from woman to warrior happens gradually, through a series of increasingly desperate choices that strip away feminine identity like layers of unnecessary clothing. First, Mary serves as a foot soldier in Flanders, where her skill with musket and sword earns respect from men who never suspect her true sex. Then she joins the merchant marine, where her knowledge of seamanship and navigation makes her a valuable crew regardless of what lies beneath her binding cloth. But legitimate employment offers limited opportunities for someone legally dead, officially male, and morally flexible. When Mary's merchant vessel is captured by pirates, she faces the choice between revelation and recruitment. Her decision to join the pirate crew isn't driven by romantic adventure. It's calculated survival by someone who understands that maritime criminals offer better career prospects than maritime commerce. And Bonnie's path to piracy follows a different route, but leads to the same destination. Born to a wealthy Charleston lawyer and his serving maid, she grows up with privilege, but not respectability, wealth, but not legitimacy. Her violent temper and sexual appetites scandalize Charlestown society, leading to a marriage of convenience with small-time pirate James Bonnie that serves more as escape than romance. The meeting between and Mary aboard Calico Jack's sloop creates one of history's most dangerous partnerships. Both women have spent years hiding their true selves behind masculine facades, and finding another female who shares their violent preferences creates a bond stronger than sisterhood. They become lovers, fighters, and mutual enablers of increasingly savage behavior that shocks even hardened male pirates. The sexual dynamics aboard pirate vessels become more complex when women join crews as equals rather than captives. Traditional maritime homosexuality continues alongside heterosexual relationships, creating networks of physical intimacy that strengthen crew loyalty while complicating command structure. And in Mary's relationship with Calico Jack forms a love triangle that functions as both personal romance and military alliance. Combat reveals the unique advantages female pirates possess over their male counterparts. Enemies who hesitate to kill women discover too late that feminine appearance conceals masculine training and murderous intent. Merchant sailors who assume female pirates are camp followers or prostitutes die, with surprised expressions as cutlass blades split their skulls. The psychological impact of being killed by a woman adds an extra layer of humiliation that increases terror and improves surrender rates. But female pirates also face unique vulnerabilities that their male colleagues never experience. Pregnancy can end a career more effectively than any naval patrol, forcing women to choose between motherhood and maritime violence. Sexual assault from their own crewmates remains a constant threat despite their proven ability to defend themselves. Most critically, capture means facing judges who view female criminals as unnatural monsters deserving special punishment. The trial of Bonnie and Mary Red demonstrates how society responds to women who violate fundamental assumptions about feminine nature. The prosecutor argues that female pirates are more dangerous than male ones because they corrupt the natural order that keeps women subordinate and society stable. The judge sentences them to hang not just for piracy, but for the greater crime of rejecting their prescribed gender roles. Pregnancy saves both women from immediate execution, as English law forbids hanging pregnant criminals. Mary Red dies in prison from fever before her child is born, ending her brief but spectacular career as history's most successful female pirate. And Bonnie's wealthy father secures her release through political connections, allowing her to disappear into obscurity rather than infamy. The broader context of women and piracy reveals how maritime crime offered opportunities for female advancement impossible in legitimate society. Pirate crews that operated under democratic principles often proved more egalitarian than legal institutions, judging members by competence rather than gender. Women who could fight, navigate, and kill earned respect and authority that no amount of beauty or virtue could purchase in conventional society. But female success in piracy remained exceptional rather than typical. Most women who encountered pirates did so as victims rather than colleagues, facing rape, slavery, or death at the hands of men who viewed feminine weakness as invitation for exploitation. And Bonnie and Mary Red succeeded precisely because they rejected traditional femininity so completely that they became honorary men in the eyes of their crewmates. The medical realities of feminine disguise reveal the physical toll of maintaining masculine identity aboard pirate vessels. Binding breasts tight enough to hide feminine curves restricts breathing and causes chronic pain. Concealing menstruation becomes a monthly crisis that could expose identity if discovered. Most challenging, both women must constantly monitor their behavior to avoid unconscious feminine gestures that might reveal their true sex. Pirate democracy, despite its egalitarian principles, still operates within broader cultural assumptions about gender roles. Female pirates who reveal their sex often find themselves relegated to traditional feminine duties, cooking, cleaning, tending wounded, regardless of their proven competence at violence and seamanship. Only by maintaining masculine disguises can they preserve their equality and authority. The legend of female pirates grows in the telling, transforming brutal criminals into romantic figures who chose adventure over domesticity. Popular culture celebrates, and Bonnie and Mary read, as early feminists who fought for independence and equality, ignoring the reality that they achieved liberation through murder, theft, and systematic violence against innocent victims. The truth about women pirates is darker and more complex than either condemnation or celebration suggests. They were neither feminist heroes nor demonic aberrations, but desperate individuals who discovered that maritime crime offered opportunities for power and wealth denied to them by legitimate society. Their stories reveal how extreme circumstances can transform anyone, regardless of gender, into predators willing to kill for freedom. Chapter 11. The War Against Pirates, Empire Strikes Back. The hemp rope stretches taut above execution dock as another pirate dances his final jig, legs kicking frantically in the morning air before going still forever. This is London in 1720, where the British Empire has finally decided that maritime terrorism must end, where captured pirates face justice swift and brutal. The tide will wash over this corpse 3 times before it's cut down, maritime law decreeing that the sea must claim its due before the earth can have what remains. Woodes Rogers arrives in Nassau Harbor like an avenging angel backed by royal warships and armed with pardons for pirates willing to surrender and death sentences for those who refuse. The former privateer turned colonial governor understands both sides of the maritime violence equation. He's fought pirates and employed them, hunted them, and hired them. Now he comes to transform Britain's most notorious pirate haven into a respectable colonial outpost. You are a Nassau pirate watching from the harbor as British naval vessels take position to blockade your criminal paradise. The party is ending. The golden age that transformed desperate criminals into wealthy rebels is dying in the crossfire between imperial authority and maritime anarchy. Your choices have narrowed to 3. Accept the king's pardon and become a subject, flee to new hunting grounds and remain a rebel, or fight and die as a martyr to maritime freedom. The king's pardon offers amnesty to pirates willing to abandon their criminal careers, but the terms reveal how completely the balance of power has shifted. Former pirates must inform on colleagues who refuse to surrender, serve in Royal Naval forces against their former brothers, and submit to colonial authority that views them as reformed criminals rather than respected citizens. It's conditional mercy that transforms predators into hunting dogs for the empire that once hunted them. Some pirates embrace legitimacy with the enthusiasm of men who understand that survival requires adaptation. Benjamin Hornigold, mentor to Blackbeard and founder of the Flying Gang, accepts his pardon and becomes a pirate hunter whose intimate knowledge of criminal networks makes him devastatingly effective at tracking down former colleagues. His transformation from pirate captain to royal officer demonstrates how quickly allegiances shift when imperial power finally commits to ending maritime lawlessness. But others choose rebellion over redemption, and their defiance triggers a war more brutal than anything seen during piracy's golden age. Charles Vane burns a British naval vessel in Nassau Harbor rather than surrender, turning his rejection of royal authority into a declaration of independence that can only end in death. His escape from Nassau begins a chase that spans the Caribbean as British naval forces systematically hunt down every pirate who refuses to submit. The execution of Stede Bonnet reveals how thoroughly the rules have changed. The gentleman pirate's wealth and social connections, which once protected him from consequences, now count for nothing against imperial determination to make examples of maritime rebels. His execution becomes public theater designed to demonstrate that neither birth nor fortune can save criminals from royal justice once the empire decides to enforce its laws. Bartholomew Roberts responds to the new reality by embracing total war against merchant shipping, transforming piracy from opportunistic crime into systematic terrorism. Black Bart's royal fortune becomes a floating symbol of resistance to imperial authority, a pirate republic that recognizes no law except the democracy of violence. His success attracts desperate men from across the Caribbean who prefer death in battle to life under colonial rule. The naval technology gap between pirates and imperial forces widens dramatically as Britain commits serious resources to ending maritime terrorism. Royal Navy vessels mount heavier guns, carry larger crews, and operate under professional discipline that overwhelms pirate ships designed for speed rather than sustained combat. When HMS Swallow encounters the Royal Fortune off Cape Coast Castle, the battle's outcome is determined before the first shot is fired. Captain Chaloner Ogle's victory over Roberts demonstrates how professional naval forces systematically destroy amateur pirates once imperial power focuses on the problem. The battle at Cape Lopez isn't a romantic duel between gentlemen warriors. It's industrial slaughter where superior firepower, tactical training, and institutional support overwhelm individual courage and desperate skill. The mass executions that follow major pirate captures serve multiple purposes beyond simple justice. Public hangings at Execution Dock provide entertainment for London crowds while demonstrating imperial power to potential criminals. Colonial executions in ports like Port Royal and Charleston warn local populations about the consequences of supporting maritime terrorism. Most importantly, systematic execution eliminates pirate leadership faster than recruitment can replace it. But the war against piracy also reveals the economic interests driving imperial policy. British merchants who once profited from pirate raids on Spanish shipping now find their own vessels targeted by criminals who recognize no national boundaries. Insurance costs for maritime commerce skyrocket as piracy spreads beyond its original targets to threaten all seaborne trade. The empire that once tolerated piracy as unofficial warfare now suppresses it as a threat to legitimate business. The intelligence networks developed to hunt pirates establish surveillance systems that will outlast the pirate threat itself. Colonial officials compile detailed records of suspected criminals, known associates, and suspicious activities that create databases of maritime troublemakers. Former pirates turned informants provide insider knowledge that makes subsequent criminal enterprises almost impossible to organize successfully. The transformation of former pirate havens reveals how quickly lawlessness can be replaced by institutional authority when sufficient force is applied. Nassau evolves from criminal republic to respectable colonial port within a decade of Rogers' arrival. Port Royal sheds its reputation as the wickedest city in the world to become a legitimate trading center. The Bahamas transform from pirate sanctuary to British naval base that projects imperial power throughout the Caribbean. Medical advances in treating battle wounds result from increased naval combat generated by the war against piracy. Royal Navy surgeons develop new techniques for treating gunshot wounds, performing amputations, and preventing infection that save lives and preserve fighting strength. These innovations spread throughout the British medical establishment, improving health care for both military and civilian populations. The diplomatic consequences of suppressing piracy extend far beyond maritime crime itself. British success in eliminating Caribbean pirates demonstrates imperial capability that influences European balance of power calculations. Spanish colonial officials who once viewed British pirates as existential threats now negotiate with British authorities as equals rather than enemies. The Dutch and French acknowledge British naval supremacy in American waters, leading to treaty arrangements that reshape colonial boundaries. But the war's ultimate success creates new problems that imperial authorities hadn't anticipated. Unemployed sailors who once served aboard pirate vessels now struggle to find legitimate employment in peacetime maritime industries. Former pirates who accepted pardons often return to crime when civilian life proves economically inadequate. Most significantly, the imperial naval infrastructure developed to fight pirates becomes a permanent military presence that colonial populations eventually view as oppressive rather than protective. The end of the war against pirates marks more than the suppression of maritime crime. It represents the triumph of institutional authority over individual rebellion, of organized state power over chaotic personal freedom. The romanticized golden age of piracy dies not in glorious battle, but in administrative efficiency, as bureaucratic systems prove more effective than cutlass and cannon at maintaining order on the high seas. Chapter 12. The Last of the Buccaneers, Bartholomew Roberts, and the Dying of the Light. The black flag snaps in Atlantic wind as Royal Fortune cuts through morning swells like a blade through silk, her 42 guns gleaming in African sunlight. This is 1722, and Bartholomew Roberts stands on his quarterdeck watching the horizon where HMS Swallow waits with royal patience and professional murder. Black Bart knows this dance will be his last. The golden age is dying, and he's chosen to die with it rather than surrender to the gray world of imperial authority. You are a captured merchant captain, chained below deck aboard Robert's flagship, listening to the preparations for battle that will determine whether piracy dies as a romantic legend or grim reality. Above you, 300 pirates prepare weapons and souls for combat against the British Empire itself. They know they're outnumbered, outgunned, and historically doomed, but they also know that some things matter more than survival. Robert's career began with reluctance and evolved into magnificence, transforming a Welsh merchant sailor into history's most successful pirate captain through a combination of mathematical precision and artistic violence. When his first ship was captured by pirates, he faced the same choice as thousands of other merchant seamen: join the crew or join the fish. His decision to embrace piracy wasn't driven by romantic adventure, but by economic calculation that maritime crime paid better than maritime commerce. The Great Ranger becomes Black Bart's floating laboratory for perfecting the science of maritime terrorism. Every aspect of pirate operations receives careful analysis. Optimal crew size for different targets, most effective intimidation techniques for various nationalities, precise profit margins for different types of cargo. Roberts approaches piracy with the same methodical intelligence that built his reputation as an exceptional navigator and ship handler. The capture of 11 slave ships off the African coast demonstrates Roberts' evolution from common pirate to maritime warlord. The Trepassey raid yields enough wealth to fund expanded operations, enough ships to create a proper fleet, and enough reputation to attract experienced crews from across the Caribbean. In a single afternoon, Black Bart transforms from nuisance raider to existential threat to Atlantic commerce. But Roberts also establishes the most sophisticated legal code in pirate history, creating governmental systems that would impress political philosophers if applied to legitimate societies. His articles regulate everything from combat duties to sexual behavior, establishing democratic procedures for electing officers while maintaining discipline necessary for military effectiveness. It's maritime law written by criminals who understand that survival requires organization. The religious warfare that defines Roberts' later career reveals how personal tragedy can transform professional criminals into apocalyptic crusaders. When pirates murder his trusted lieutenant, Roberts declares war not just on specific enemies, but on Christian civilization itself. He renames his flagship Royal Fortune in mockery of British imperial pretensions and begins flying flags that blaspheme against God as well as King. The psychological profile of Roberts reveals how prolonged violence transforms human personality in ways that make peacetime reintegration impossible. Men who spend years killing for profit develop emotional calluses that protect them from conscience, but also isolate them from normal human relationships. Robert's crew becomes his family, piracy becomes his religion, and violence becomes his primary means of emotional expression. The economics of Robert's operations demonstrate how sophisticated pirate enterprises could challenge national economies when properly organized. His fleet captures over 400 vessels during a 4-year career, disrupting Atlantic trade routes and forcing insurance costs to levels that threaten legitimate commerce. The Royal African Company petitions Parliament for naval protection, arguing that piracy poses greater threats to British interests than foreign enemies. Female captives aboard Robert's ships face systematic brutality that reveals the darkest aspects of pirate democracy. While Black Bart's articles prohibit rape without consent, they assume that consent can be obtained through coercion, threat, or simply wearing down resistance over time. Women who refuse sexual cooperation face starvation, beating, or abandonment on uninhabited islands where death comes slowly. The torture techniques perfected aboard Robert's vessels represent innovations in human cruelty that combine medical knowledge with sadistic creativity. Captured merchants are subjected to the sweat, being forced to run around the mainmast while pirates stab them with cutlass points until they reveal hidden cargo locations. Others face wounding, having rope twisted around their heads until blood vessels burst and consciousness fades. The alliance system Roberts develops with other pirate crews creates the last great confederation of maritime criminals in Atlantic history. Coordinated attacks by multiple pirate fleets overwhelm merchant convoys. Shared intelligence networks provide advance warning of naval patrols, and mutual defense agreements protect individual captains from isolation and destruction. It's organized crime on a scale that won't be seen again until the 20th century. But Roberts also faces internal contradictions that ultimately doom his enterprise. Democratic pirate crews expect shares of plunder that require increasingly dangerous raids to satisfy. Successful operations attract naval attention that makes future success more difficult. Most fatally, Robert's own success creates expectations among his followers that can only be met through escalating violence that inevitably provokes overwhelming retaliation. The final confrontation off Cape Coast Castle represents more than the death of a pirate captain. It's the extinction of an entire way of life that had flourished in the power vacuum between European empires. When grape shot from HMS swallowed tears through Robert's throat, it silences not just an individual voice, but an entire tradition of maritime rebellion that had challenged imperial authority for over a century. The aftermath reveals how completely the balance of power has shifted against piracy. Robert's surviving crew members face mass execution rather than recruitment into royal service. Their ships are burned rather than commissioned into legitimate fleets. Most significantly, no new pirate leaders emerge to replace the fallen, as potential recruits recognize that the golden age has ended and future careers lie with empire rather than rebellion. The treasure that Roberts accumulated during his spectacular career disappears with his death, probably scattered among crew members who flee to different continents rather than risk capture and execution. Unlike romantic legends suggest, successful pirates invest their wealth in ships, weapons, and crew payments rather than burying it for future recovery. The real treasure was the freedom to live outside conventional society, and that currency died with its last great spender. Robert's legacy extends beyond his individual achievements to represent the final flowering of democratic piracy before imperial authority imposed order on the world's oceans. His career demonstrates how criminal enterprise, given sufficient organization and leadership, could challenge state power and offer alternative forms of governance to desperate populations. But it also proves that individual rebellion, however spectacular, cannot ultimately prevail against institutional determination backed by superior resources. The golden age of piracy ends not with a bang, but with a bureaucratic whimper, as imperial administrators systematically eliminate the economic and political conditions that had made maritime crime profitable and sustainable. The sea that had offered refuge to rebels and outcasts becomes a highway for legitimate commerce, protected by professional navies that leave no room for romantic criminals or democratic predators. Black Bart's death marks the last page in a chapter of human history that will never be repeated, when the ocean's vastness offered genuine escape from civilization's constraints and individual courage could challenge imperial power. The age of sail that made piracy possible is ending, replaced by steam and steel that will make the seas safer but infinitely less free. Chapter 13: Pirates of the South China Sea, The Last Empire. The red silk banners flutter like blood-stained prayers above 80,000 pirates preparing for their final battle against the Qing dynasty. This is 1810, and Shi Yang stands on her flagship's deck, no longer the frightened courtesan who married into piracy, but the Iron Empress who commands the largest criminal navy in human history. Her confederation controls waters from Macau to Vietnam, collects taxes from terrified merchants, and governs floating cities that exist beyond any emperor's reach. You are a Portuguese merchant captain, and your ship has just entered waters where Shi Yang's word is law, where her red flag transforms the South China Sea into a highway of organized extortion. Your cargo holds opium, silk, and silver, wealth that will either buy safe passage through Confederation waters or fund another season of maritime empire. But the choice isn't yours to make. The Dragon Lady has already decided your fate from the moment her scouts spotted your sails on the horizon. The Confederation system reaches its zenith under Shi Yang's iron discipline, transforming anarchic piracy into governmental administration that rivals imperial bureaucracy for sophistication and efficiency. 6 colored fleets divide the South China Sea like maritime provinces, each controlling specific territories with defined boundaries, diplomatic protocols, and tax collection systems. Red, black, white, blue, yellow, and green flags operate under Confederation law that recognizes territorial sovereignty while maintaining unified defense against external threats. The Red Flag Fleet alone commands 1,800 vessels and controls over 70,000 pirates, making it larger than most national navies and more disciplined than many regular armies. Shi Yang's administrative genius transforms random criminals into professional sailors who operate under strict codes of conduct that regulate everything from combat tactics to sexual behavior. Death awaits those who rape without permission, steal from Confederation funds, or disobey orders during military operations. But this maritime empire is built on systematic terror that makes earlier piracy look like children's games. Villages that refuse tribute payments are burned as examples to neighboring communities. Merchant crews who resist taxation are tortured until they reveal hidden cargo or die from interrogation. Coastal populations live in constant fear of Confederation justice, which ranges from fines for minor infractions to public executions for serious crimes against pirate law. The human trafficking networks that fund Confederation operations reveal how organized crime can industrialize slavery when given sufficient scale and governmental protection. Pirates capture entire fishing villages, selling the men into galley service while reserving women and children for specialized markets that pay premium prices for specific types of human cargo. The Pearl River Delta becomes a processing center for human merchandise that supplies slave markets from Southeast Asia to the Indian Ocean. Imperial naval forces prove hopelessly outmatched by Confederation fleets that combine superior seamanship with intimate knowledge of coastal waters that have been pirate hunting grounds for generations. When Qing warships engage Confederation vessels, the battles become slaughters where Imperial prestige drowns in South China Sea blood. Pirates use shallow draft junks to lure Imperial galleons into coastal waters where superior maneuverability provides overwhelming tactical advantages. The diplomatic sophistication of Confederation governance matches its military effectiveness, as pirate leaders conduct international relations with the same complexity as sovereign nations. Treaties between different colored fleets establish trade regulations, territorial boundaries, and mutual defense agreements that transform criminal anarchy into political order. When Portuguese warships attack red flag vessels, other Confederation fleets provide military support according to formal alliance obligations that pirates honor more faithfully than many legitimate governments. Foreign observers struggle to comprehend the scale of Confederation organization, which controls territory larger than European kingdoms and governs populations that exceed most national censuses. European merchants who once dismissed Chinese pirates as disorganized criminals now negotiate with Confederation officials as equals, recognizing that pirate authority often proves more reliable than imperial mandates in determining who lives and who dies on South China Sea waters. The economics of Confederation taxation create parallel governmental systems that compete directly with imperial authority for control of maritime commerce. Merchant vessels receive official receipts for tribute payments, stamped documents that guarantee safe passage through Confederation waters. Fishing boats purchase seasonal licenses that protect them from pirate raids. Coastal towns buy protection contracts that provide security more reliable than imperial forces can offer. But Sure Yang understands what destroys most successful criminals: that military victory isn't sustainable against enemies with unlimited resources and time. As imperial pressure increases and European warships enter Chinese waters to protect their own commercial interests, she recognizes that the Confederation faces a war it cannot win through violence alone. Her solution demonstrates the political genius that built her empire. Negotiate from strength before that strength inevitably fades. The surrender negotiations reveal Confederation power at its peak, as Sure Yang transforms military defeat into political victory through diplomatic brilliance that would impress professional statesmen. She doesn't capitulate to imperial authority. She merges her organization with the Qing government, becoming an admiral in the Imperial Navy while maintaining operational control of her fleets. Her officers receive official commissions, her ships become auxiliary naval vessels, and her taxation system continues under imperial blessing. The human cost of this transition never appears in official records, but the mathematical precision is undeniable. Over 17,000 pirates accept imperial amnesty, receiving ranks in the Qing Navy that legitimize their previous crimes while preserving their organizational structure. The Confederation that once challenged imperial authority becomes part of the imperial system, proving that successful piracy can evolve into legitimate governance when leadership proves sufficiently adaptable. The cultural integration of former pirates into imperial society demonstrates how criminal organizations can transform into respectable institutions when political conditions permit such evolution. Pirate captains become naval officers, Confederation administrators join imperial bureaucracy, and maritime criminals receive honors for serving the same government they once opposed. It's conquest disguised as capitulation, rebellion legitimized through bureaucratic paperwork. Sure Yang's retirement marks the end of traditional piracy in Chinese waters, as the last great Confederation leader trades her red silk banners for imperial yellow robes. Her story proves that Chinese piracy was never about individual criminals seeking personal wealth. It was about alternative forms of governance that competed with imperial authority for control of the world's most profitable waterways. When she dies peacefully in her bed, surrounded by wealth and respectability, she takes with her the last memories of when criminals could build empires and outlaws could become admirals through superior organization and political intelligence. The South China Sea returns to imperial control, but the Confederation's legacy endures in administrative systems, trade networks, and governmental structures that survive long after the last pirate junk disappears below the horizon. They prove that organized crime, given sufficient scale and sophistication, could evolve into legitimate governance, and that the line between piracy and politics was often thinner than the water that separated them from the empires they challenged. Chapter 14: Modern Maritime Terrorism. When pirates evolved with technology. The steel hull cuts through North Atlantic swells as U 558 stalks convoy HX 79 like a mechanical shark hunting wounded whales. This is 1940, and Captain Lieutenant Gunther Crack peers through his periscope at merchant vessels whose holds carry American aid to Britain, cargo that will never reach its destination. The age of wooden ships and cutlass battles has ended, replaced by diesel engines and torpedo tubes that kill from miles away, without honor or quarter. You're the radio operator aboard SS Ville de Liège, and your nightmare begins when the first torpedo explodes amidships, tearing steel plates like paper and sending your Belgian cargo ship toward the ocean floor in minutes rather than hours. There's no time for proper distress signals, no opportunity for negotiation or surrender. Modern maritime warfare has eliminated the personal element from piracy, transforming individual violence into industrial slaughter. The Confederate commerce raiders of the American Civil War established the template for modern maritime terrorism, proving that steam-powered predators can devastate enemy commerce while maintaining the legal fiction of legitimate warfare. CSS Alabama alone captures or destroys 65 Union merchant vessels during her 2-year career, paralyzing Northern shipping while Confederate officers maintain the pretense that they're naval personnel rather than pirates with government commissions. Captain Raphael Semmes commands Alabama with the same predatory intelligence that characterized earlier pirate captains, but his methods reflect technological evolution that makes traditional boarding actions obsolete. Steam propulsion allows him to overtake sailing vessels that once might have escaped, while rifled cannon can sink targets from distances that make resistance futile. When Alabama's guns speak, merchant vessels surrender or die. There's no middle ground for negotiation. The transition from sail to steam fundamentally alters the economics of maritime predation, requiring larger investments in vessels and fuel while offering correspondingly greater rewards in speed and firepower. Coal-burning warships can maintain pursuit regardless of wind direction, arrive at predetermined intercept points with mathematical precision, and engage multiple targets in rapid succession. It's piracy industrialized, violence mechanized, and terror systematized. The German U-boat campaigns of World War I represent the ultimate evolution of maritime terrorism, where submarines hunt merchant vessels like underwater predators stalking surface prey. Unrestricted submarine warfare eliminates the traditional distinction between combatant and civilian, military and merchant, legitimate target and innocent victim. When torpedoes strike without warning, the ocean becomes a graveyard where international law drowns alongside human bodies. The sinking of Lusitania demonstrates how modern technology transforms individual tragedies into mass casualties that shock entire civilizations. A single torpedo kills 1,198 passengers and crew in 18 minutes, proving that mechanical warfare can produce death tolls that dwarf anything achieved by traditional pirates. The personal violence of cutlass and pistol seems almost quaint compared to explosive charges that vaporize human beings without giving them time to scream. But technological piracy also creates new vulnerabilities that traditional criminals never faced. Steam engines require coal bunkers that limit operational range, forcing raiders to establish supply networks that can be disrupted by enemy action. Radio communications allow merchant vessels to summon help while under attack, reducing the isolation that once protected pirates from immediate retaliation. Most critically, mechanized warfare requires industrial infrastructure that individual criminals cannot provide or maintain. The transformation of maritime crime from individual enterprise to state-sponsored terrorism reflects broader changes in warfare itself, as nations discover that attacking enemy commerce can be more effective than destroying enemy armies. Confederate raiders sink Union shipping while avoiding Union naval forces. German submarines strangle British supply lines while evading British battleships. And modern pirates learn that economic warfare often achieves strategic objectives more efficiently than tactical victories. Prohibition-era rum runners demonstrate how technological advancement can democratize maritime crime, allowing small-time criminals to challenge governmental authority through superior speed and maneuverability. Fast motorboats carrying illegal alcohol can outrun Coast Guard cutters, while superior radio equipment provides advance warning of patrol activities. It's David versus Goliath updated for the machine age, where individual entrepreneurs use technology to circumvent institutional power. The radio networks that coordinate rum-running operations establish communication systems that prefigure modern organized crime, allowing criminal enterprises to function across vast geographical areas while maintaining operational security that law enforcement cannot penetrate. Coded transmissions coordinate pickup and delivery schedules, warn of enforcement activities, and arrange financial transactions that leave no paper trail. Maritime crime evolves from opportunistic violence to systematic business operation. But mechanized piracy also produces mechanized law enforcement that eventually overwhelms individual criminal enterprises through superior resources and institutional persistence. Coast Guard aircraft can spot rum runners from miles away. Radio direction finding can locate criminal transmissions, and faster patrol boats eliminate the speed advantage that made bootlegging profitable. Technology that empowers criminals also empowers the authorities who hunt them. World War II submarine warfare represents the industrial apotheosis of maritime terrorism, where mechanical predators stalk commercial shipping with efficiency that traditional pirates could never match. German U-boats sink over 3,500 merchant vessels during the Battle of the Atlantic, killing tens of thousands of civilian sailors while disrupting Allied supply lines that feed the European war effort. It's piracy elevated to strategic weapon that threatens entire national economies. The psychological impact of submarine warfare extends far beyond immediate casualties, creating terror that affects all maritime commerce, even when specific vessels aren't under attack. Merchant sailors face the constant possibility of sudden death from unseen enemies, while shipping companies struggle with insurance costs that reflect the reality that peacetime commercial law offers no protection against wartime piracy. The ocean becomes a hunting ground where profit margins are measured against mortality rates. The emergence of modern piracy in the late 20th century demonstrates how criminal enterprises adapt to technological change while maintaining traditional motivations of greed, desperation, and lack of legitimate alternatives. Somali pirates use GPS navigation to locate targets, satellite phones to coordinate operations, and assault rifles to intimidate crews, but their fundamental methods remain unchanged from ancient times. Board vessel, threaten violence, demand payment. The container ship revolution creates new opportunities for maritime crime while eliminating others. as standardized cargo handling reduces crew sizes that once provided natural defense against boarding parties while concentrating valuable goods in predictable shipping lanes that become hunting grounds for modern predators. Technology that increases efficiency also increases vulnerability, proving that progress often creates as many problems as it solves. The future of maritime crime lies not in romantic rebellion against authority, but in technological sophistication that matches or exceeds law enforcement capabilities, criminal organizations that function like multinational corporations, and individual predators who use modern tools to practice ancient violence. The ocean remains what it has always been, a frontier where law ends and human nature begins, where the strong prey upon the weak, and where the tide always collects its due in blood. Chapter 15. Somali Pirates, Terror in the Modern Age. The AK-47's muzzle flash illuminates the dawn sky as automatic gunfire erupts from the small skiff, racing toward MV Maersk, Alabama, through Indian Ocean swells. This is April 2009, and Abdiwali Muse leads 3 other Somali pirates in what will become the most famous hijacking of the 21st century. The age of cutlass and cannon has given way to assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, but the fundamental equation remains unchanged. Desperate men with weapons hunting vulnerable targets on waters where no law protects the innocent. You are Captain Richard Phillips, standing on your bridge as modern pirates approach your cargo vessel with the same predatory intent that has driven maritime criminals for 4 millennia. Your ship carries food aid to Kenya, humanitarian cargo that offers no protection against men who view mercy as weakness and international law as meaningless theory. The radio crackles with distress calls that may bring help or merely alert other pirates to fresh opportunities. The collapse of Somalia creates perfect conditions for maritime terrorism, as failed state authority leaves coastal waters ungoverned while economic desperation drives fishing communities toward criminal enterprises. When foreign trawlers destroy traditional fishing grounds through overfishing and toxic waste dumping, Somali fishermen face the choice between starvation and piracy. Their decision transforms one of the world's busiest shipping lanes into a hunting ground where commercial vessels become prey. The technical sophistication of Somali operations reveals how modern criminals adapt traditional methods to contemporary technology. GPS units replace celestial navigation. Satellite phones provide communication over vast distances, and high-speed fiberglass skiffs allow pursuit of vessels that steam-age pirates could never catch. Motherships extend operational range hundreds of miles from shore, creating mobile bases that can strike anywhere in the western Indian Ocean. The economics of ransom payments create perverse incentives that encourage rather than discourage piracy, as insurance companies find it cheaper to pay criminals than fund security measures. Shipping companies that invest in defensive measures subsidize competitors who accept piracy as a cost of doing business, while successful ransom payments fund larger and better-equipped pirate operations. The international community inadvertently finances the criminal enterprises it claims to oppose. The decline of Somali piracy after 2012 results not from military victory, but from economic evolution, as international naval patrols, improved ship security, and alternative economic opportunities reduce both attractiveness and profitability of maritime crime. Former pirates find employment in legitimate fishing, security services, or coastal development projects that offer steady income without criminal risks. It's rehabilitation through economics rather than punishment through law enforcement. Chapter 16. The Eternal Tide. Why Pirates Never Die. The yacht's anchor chain rattles in darkness as masked figures slip over the gunwale like phantoms from humanity's criminal past. This is Venezuela, 2023, and modern pirates board luxury vessels with the same predatory intent that drove ancient sea peoples to burn Bronze Age cities. The weapons have evolved from bronze swords to assault rifles, the targets from grain ships to pleasure craft, but the fundamental equation remains unchanged. Desperate people with weapons hunting vulnerable victims on waters where law means nothing. The psychological appeal of piracy transcends historical periods because it addresses fundamental human needs that civilization can suppress but never eliminate. Pirates represent freedom from social constraints, escape from economic desperation, and rebellion against authority that many find attractive even when they lack courage to embrace it themselves. Every office worker trapped in bureaucratic routine harbors secret fantasies of cutting loose from society's expectations and sailing toward lawless horizons. The eternal cycle of maritime crime reflects broader patterns of human behavior that repeat across cultures and centuries with mathematical precision. Failed states create power vacuums that criminals fill. Economic desperation drives people toward illegal alternatives, and technological advancement provides new tools for ancient crimes. The specific methods change, but underlying motivations remain constant: greed, desperation, and the eternal human tendency to take what others have rather than create wealth through legitimate means. The environmental destruction that drives contemporary piracy demonstrates how ecological collapse creates social conditions favoring criminal behavior over legitimate alternatives. Overfishing destroys traditional livelihoods. Pollution poisons coastal waters, and climate change disrupts weather patterns that have sustained maritime communities for generations. When the ocean can no longer support honest work, it becomes a hunting ground for dishonest men who view crime as environmental adaptation. The future of maritime crime lies not in wooden ships and cutlass battles, but in technological sophistication that matches law enforcement capabilities, criminal organizations functioning like multinational corporations, and individual predators using modern tools to practice ancient violence. Artificial intelligence will help pirates identify targets, cryptocurrency will help them launder profits, and autonomous vessels will become both weapons and victims in conflicts spanning cyberspace and physical reality. The eternal truth about piracy is that it represents humanity's refusal to accept limitations that civilization imposes on individual behavior. Pirates are criminals, but they're also symbols of human rebellion against social constraints, economic inequality, and political authority. They persist because the conditions that create them, poverty, injustice, and lack of legitimate opportunity, persist, and because the ocean remains what it has always been, a frontier where law ends and human nature begins. The tide continues its eternal rhythm, washing ashore the debris of human ambition while carrying away evidence of human crime. Pirates rise and fall like waves, each generation believing they've discovered something new while repeating patterns older than recorded history. The sea remembers everything and forgives nothing, and somewhere in darkness between waves, new criminals are already planning their next assault on civilization's fragile pretense that law can tame the waters where pirates were born and where they will never truly die.